Hey, hi everyone. I hope all of you are able to hear me clearly, and I can see some of you have joined the YouTube chat. It will be great if you can just confirm, say hi, and start sharing your experience as well of today's MICAT. I'm assuming that those of you who joined have either taken the MICAT today or some of you may be planning to take the MICAT too. Of course, we'll be talking about what exactly happened during the test, which will also help you to prepare for MICAT too. All right. So let's get started with the session, and I will be talking about the entire experience of taking the test. So I'll also tell you about the things that happened at the center and so on. Hopefully, that will also give you some insights, right? Yeah. Hi, Keyur. Hi, Kush. Hi, Rishabh. Hi, Harsha. Hi, Tanmay. Good to see all of you. I happened to meet a lot of students today at the center. So my center was in Mumbai, Powai, and got a chance to meet quite a few students today. So I was happy on that front. So let's get started with the discussion for today. And MyCat 1 was a fair bit of a surprise. So I'll be talking about the details of it as we progress. No surprises in terms of the structure of the test, right? So the way it was last year, they had the same pattern. The year prior to that, they had 20 questions on the GK. Last year, they had made it 10 questions on the GK, which they continued. Otherwise, the remaining format remained exactly the same. So once you reach the center, and my slot was 9 to 11:15, it was written that by maximum 8:30 you have to reach the center. I happened to reach at 8:32 or something. The gate was closed, so there was another girl with me, and she was also waiting outside. Finally, they let us in. Of course, comfortably, we were at around 8:45. I was sitting at my desk. The test started at 9 o'clock, and there were some instructions that you had to go through. Right, there was also a demo that was there, which was the initial 3 minutes. You cannot skip that demo. You have to go through it. The demo is useful because it allows you to test whether your keyboard is working fine or not. So they'll give you 3 minutes and a sentence will appear. The sentence would be something like quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog with some special characters just to ensure that your keyboard is working fine. There were two students that I found in my lab where the keyboard was a problem, because of which they were shifted to another PC. But majority of the people didn't have any issue with the keyboard. So that demo is 3 minutes. You have to test your keyboard out. And as some of you might be aware, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog is essentially a sentence that contains all the letters of the English alphabet. So the testing was done and the paper started. You will see the initial instructions in which they will mention psychometric test and everything, the timing that is there. Psychometric 150 questions, 30 minutes. It is qualifying in nature. Note that there are no right or wrong answers to psychometric. Do not try to answer in a particular manner. Just try to be honest to what you are, and you should be able to finish it. The descriptive test, which is the most interesting part of MyCat, was also interesting again this time. So I'll talk about the question that appeared. And then the aptitude part, which was 70 questions and 80 minutes, starting from divergent and convergent, verbal, quant, and GK. Now you can switch among these sections during that 80 minutes. So you can jump from one section to another, one question to another, that is allowed. Now, in terms of what is the good attempt for this particular paper, for psychometric and descriptive, because you're supposed to answer all the questions, we have said all. Overall, I found that in divergent and convergent thinking, for a very good candidate, it was possible to go beyond 13, 14, 15. So that is why I'm saying good attempt would be around 12 to 13. There were a few questions which were difficult in nature. Maybe they had to do, so there was one question on syllogisms, I remember, where you had to check for individual options. And I think there were 6 or 8 options for that question. It didn't make sense to spend a lot of time on such questions, right? So keeping all of those things in mind, I would say in divergent and convergent, if you have attempted around 12 to 13 questions, I think that can be considered a good attempt. Those of you who took the test in the morning, if you can just comment with your attempts, right? So in each of the sections, how many questions attempted, I think that will also help others to understand what exactly they can imagine for the next one. For verbal ability, 11 to 12 questions is how I am going to put it. If you have attempted around 11 to 12 questions, I think that's a reasonable attempt. For quant, a very good candidate would have attempted 9, 10. I will go out and say, even if you have attempted 5 or 6 questions with 100% accuracy, I think that's a fair attempt in quant section today, because quant was difficult. It was fairly intense. There weren't any straightforward questions. I'll maybe share a couple of questions once we start talking about it. and then the GK section. In GK, now there are only 10 questions, hardly any element of choice. If you attempted 7 or 8 questions, I think good to go, right? So overall, that would be my take on the good attempts in each of the sections. Of course, we'll talk more about the individual. Just to give you an overview, so psychometric, as I mentioned, it's compulsory and it's qualifying in nature. So the performance is used as qualifying. Now, the marks or assessment criteria is not revealed to the candidate, so we don't know exactly how they look at it. But you could see what they're trying to assess, right? So there were some sentences where the immediate next sentence was worded in a negative manner. So and of course, the way it is true for a lot of psychometric tests, more questions were worded positively compared to the negative questions. But there were a lot of questions where you see a question and immediate next question is worded negatively. For example, if I am, one of the sentence could be, I am always open to new ideas and listen to what others have to say. And then there is a Likert scale that is given. The next is, I am somebody who is not very open to new suggestions and so on. So you could see that thing that, okay, one sentence is positively worded, the immediate next sentence is negatively worded. So then you can even think as to what response should I give, so that if you just contradict yourself immediately, it may be a problem, right? And after some point, you will see repetition happening. So the same sentence, the same essence, but it is asked using slightly different words, right? So all of these things will be there. No point thinking too much about psychometric. Just be true to yourself. Comfortably, you should be able to finish 150 questions in 30 minutes. I think I was done in about, I had like 10 minutes remaining by the time I completed, because you don't have to think too much. You know yourself pretty well, right? So you just have to answer that way. In descriptive writing, there's no negative marking, but it's important that you finish the entire thing to get maximum marks. And for section C, as all of you are aware, the marking scheme is +1 and -0.25. So overall, if I have to give some verdict on it, I would say MICAT 1 was more difficult compared to last year's test. The cutoff will be on the lower side. What our estimate is, and it's not only that I appeared, there were other mentors as well from the academics team who took the test today. We feel that if you got around 25 to 30, 32, right, I think that's a very good score to have. Note that it's not only MICAT score that they look at, it's a combination of MICAT and CAT, or MICAT and ZAT, and so on. So if you have done okay today, but your CAT score is high, you will still get a shot. If you have done very well today, if your CAT score is slightly on the low side, you'll still be able to have that shot, right? So it's a combination. Keep that in mind. Don't really just keep thinking about your MICAT attempt today. I would say 25 is a good attempt, right? And when I say 25, I'm assuming a very high accuracy. Because see, in difficult test, you tend to get conservative, which happened in quant today, right? It's a difficult test. You cannot suddenly attempt 15 questions just like that. So then you will say, okay, I know the paper is difficult. Let me attempt maybe 7 or 8. Even if those are correct, I have done my job, right? So that is why I'm keeping it on the slightly lower side. Some of you may or may not agree with this, but honestly, I feel 25 to 30, right? That is the range that I am thinking of. If you are in that range, it's a very good performance today, okay? But even if you're not been there, right? If you're not reached that stage, maybe you attempted only 20 or 21, you're expecting to get a 20, 21 or whatever. Think of, is your CAT score going to be something that will compensate for that? Or the next thing, that is the best thing that you can do, is appear for MICAT 2, right? Because ultimately they're going to have a look at that relative performance. Whichever is your best percentile, that is what they will be considering. In our experience last year, there were a few students who, even with a single digit score, got a shortlist from MICA. So single digit MICAT score, but got a shortlist because of their CAT score. Ultimately, it's a combination. So keep that in mind, okay? What about you guys? So how many questions did you attempt? How many are you expecting it to be right? Maybe you can comment with the score that you're expecting, right? So again, it will help me to, as we progress in this analysis, okay? Now let's start with psychometrics. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the test. So 150 questions, it's just one question after another. And you have so some questions are the Likert scale, like totally disagree to totally agree. So 8-point scale is what it is. And there are some questions which are true and false. Now, some of these are purely leading questions. I mean, I don't see the point of asking such questions, because it's worded in a manner in which pretty much everybody will answer in a particular way. For example, I have never taken advantage of anyone, right? So I remember that as one of the sentences, one of the questions, true or false. Now, who will say false to this, right? Everybody will say true, that I've never taken advantage of anybody, because you may or may not have done it, but then you want to portray one side of you, right? So you want to be politically correct and want to ensure that a positive perception is created. So it was worded in that manner. I don't really see the point of it, but those questions were there. You have to be fast. As I said, it's very, very important that you finish all 150 questions in 30 minutes that are given to you. All right. There is no marking scheme that is revealed. Just one question after another, keep on answering and finish it off. Okay. The second section that I'm going to talk about is the descriptive test. I'll also talk about my story. It might sound a little funny to all of you as to what I wrote, but I'll talk about it in any case. So in the descriptive test, there are 4 parts. As a MICAT aspirant, all of you would know that there are going to be 4 questions. That has been the standard thing. The first 3 questions are connected with a theme, and the last question is an independent question. So the first question was, the topic or the theme for the first 3 questions was, if social media gets really social. The question 1 was, present an argument with 3 points supporting the topic, present an argument with 3 points opposing the topic, and question 3 was, write a 300-word answer, and it was up to 300 words, on how a young manager can employ social media to create an egalitarian work culture in their organization. Now, when I read it the first time, I started wondering as to how many students would be able to know what the word egalitarian means, right? So maybe they could have used a slightly easier word, but anyway, MICA is MICA, right? So whatever it is, I think you just have to take it in stride and come up with an answer. Right? So I think social media, there are a lot of similar points that people would have created. The positive side of it, right, helps you to stay connected with others. The boundaries have reduced. You can talk to somebody who is a distant relative, and so on and so forth, right? But then there is downside. Too much exposure can be bad. It can be very bad for kids also, for example. In fact, there are laws in a lot of European countries that limit as to how many hours of TV and the screen exposure that you can have for kids. So there could be a lot of things that you could have spoken about. Whatever strikes you at that point of time, that is something that you write. Okay. I've also done a psychometric and creative writing workshop. It's there on YouTube, that video. All of you can go through it just to understand the entire thought process better, right? And then young manager, how do they employ social media? People could have spoken about, say, remote work culture, social media, which allows people to connect outside the work, and so on, right? Different things, people would have written different things on it, so that's completely okay, right? As somebody has mentioned in the chat window, right? Privacy issue, that would have been another point to speak about. The question 4, which is like the most interesting part of MICAT, the picture story writing. So there were 4 images, and you have 30 marks. This is like the chunk of this particular section. The images were, there was a red square, there was a roadside barber, a monument, a chariot without a horse. Okay. I'll tell you my story that I wrote. Maybe some of you who are planning to take MICAT may get benefited from this. My story was that some of my relatives visited me from other cities. They wanted to see what they see in movies and stuff. So then I decided to take them down south part of Mumbai, where we encountered a monument. So I spoke about that. Then we also decided to take a ride on a chariot. But one of my relatives was like, horses are not supposed to be, or animals are not supposed to be used for these purposes. So he decided that I'll not take a picture unless the horse is out, right? So we asked that guy to take the horse away. Then we took a picture. Then we also saw a roadside barber shouting something. I wrote something in Hindi as well, like one line, which I don't want to talk about. And then I spoke about that while the barber was doing his duty, somebody got a cut and there was a lot of blood. The color red is how I inferred it, right? So again, there is no limit to creativity. People could have written in various different manners. It's very important for you to specify the sequence though, because it is clearly given in the instructions that whatever is the sequence of images that you're using, you have to mention that sequence. So just write that, whether it is ABCD or DBCA or whatever. Okay. Overall, in this section, there's no negative marking. So just feel free to be creative, but try to answer all the questions, right? See, I met one of the students who said, I met one of the students who said that he was not able to answer one of the questions. So he was not able to answer question 3. Now, the problem is if you spend a lot of time on question 1, 2, and on question 4, you may not have sufficient time for Q3. Right? And that same thing can happen to any other question. So rather than trying to perfect your answer for individual questions, just write the bare minimum version first, and then you can add on that. So for example, question 1, presenting argument with 3 points, right? Just write 2 lines for those 3 points. So you have written 6 lines and then move forward. Now, if you have extra time at the end, you can always come back and expand further. You can add examples. So that is something that could have been done if you wanted to cover all 4 questions, right? So let's now move to the next part, which is the aptitude test. Now, this part, I started with divergent and convergent thinking, found it to be slightly medium level. But then when I moved to quant, I realized that the paper is overall difficult. Okay, so let me talk about the individual sections. Overall, you had 80 minutes to do these 70 questions, 20 each in divergent and convergent, verbal and quant, and 10 questions of GK. This entire section has a negative marking, +1 minus 0.25. Okay. There were a lot of questions with 8, 6, 5, 4 options. This is not a standard thing, the way you see in other tests. Some questions with 4 options, some with 5, 6, 8. 8 is the maximum that they have. But that makes the paper more challenging as well, because you have to go through more options to determine what the final answer is. So let's now talk about the individual sections. And as I've already mentioned the good attempts, I'll maybe circle you back to that particular slide later. But in divergent and convergent, word association, there were 2 questions on that. All of these questions can be classified as medium because you may not be able to, you may not know meanings of all the words that are used, right? Which makes it easy for some people, makes it more difficult for some people. Questions on syllogisms. The syllogism question was irritating because what they had done was they had given the conclusion and they had asked that out of 6 statements, what combination of statements would lead you to that conclusion? That makes it a challenging as a question format, right? So if somebody had spent more time on it, maybe they would have wasted 2.5 minutes without getting an answer as well. So the good thing is to not get stuck into these questions and try to keep them for the second round. Okay. Then there was a question on collective noun as well. Again, it's a vocab-based question. If you know it, then you know it. Right? Now let's move to the remaining part of divergent and convergent. There were 3 questions, if I recall correctly, on visual reasoning. All the 3 questions were easy. So practice visual reasoning if you're somebody who is planning to take MICAT 2, because there were 3 questions. And I think all 3 questions had either 6 or 8 options, but it was easily manageable. Okay, there was nothing difficult about these 3 visual reasoning questions. One of them was on paper folding and cutting. The other 2 were on rotations. Okay, so if you rotate, so there was a sequence given, so a series-based question, and there was one on similar pair kind of a question. Then on data sufficiency, the questions were rather irritating. The standalone puzzles which were there were okay, I would say manageable in some cases. But the only problem is, let's say, for example, I give you a set, right? 8 people are sitting around a circular table, which appeared today. 8 people sitting around a circular table. And they have some different color shirts that they're wearing. Now, you typically expect that if you have so much information, because there are some 8 pointers also that are given, 8 people sitting, you would expect at least maybe 2 questions on that set or 3 questions on that set, but there was only 1 question on the set. So that is the problem, that you have to solve the whole thing to answer 1 question. Correct. There was another thing on the books getting arranged, or so English book is second to the right of the mathematics book, or Hindi books is at one of the extremes, and so on. Even that kind of a thing, you had to first go through the options to understand that these are not the only books that are there on the shelf. Right? So every question had some element of trick to it that you have to think about. I think on coding decoding, 1 question was very, very straightforward. The other question was challenging. So that is why I'll say overall, I would consider it to be a medium difficulty thing. 12 to 13, if you have attempted in the divergent and convergent thinking, I would consider it to be a very good attempt. Okay, so if you attempted 12, 13, very good. Okay. Somebody saying attempted 18, expecting 15, 17. That's a fantastic attempt, I would say. I think you have covered a good ground in terms of the overall score that you need to reach. Okay. Okay, if you're negative in particular section, would you get a call if your overall score is say 10? Okay, so they look at it. So there are some sectional cutoffs that they have determined. That data, unfortunately, is not revealed. So we don't know exactly how they look at it, but they have mentioned even on the website that there are sectional cutoffs, but I'm assuming that those numbers are at a very, very low level. Okay. It could be like a 1 or 2 also in a lot of sections, but it's difficult to say. Okay. Let's move to the second part, second subsection rather, which is verbal ability. Now, verbal ability overall, I would say 11 to 12 attempts can be considered decent if you have 90% or higher accuracy. If you have slightly lower accuracy, ideally you should have attempted a little more to compensate for that. There were 2 RCs, total 6 questions on that. We can classify the RCs as medium. The questions were manageable, but the RCs were a little dense to read. So you had to persist. The fill in the blanks, these are not time consuming questions, but unfortunately, if you have 6 options or 8 options, then you have to spend more time on it. Okay, so 3 close test passages, and you had to just fill in the blanks. Heavily focused on vocabulary and usage of various expressions, right? There was one question on a 4x4 grid as well. Now, in terms of jumbled paragraphs and one word substitution, total 4 questions appeared. Parajumbles were manageable. There was one parajumble which had 8 sentences. Okay, so you had to read first of all those 8 sentences. Maybe you have taken CAT and it's at other exams, so you're used to 5 sentences or 4 sentences. But here you had 8 sentences. Good thing was the starting point was given. So if you had gone through the options, you would have seen all of them had the first starting as exactly the same. So then at least it gave you the starting point. Critical reasoning, para completion, jumbled sentence, summary, odd sentence, all of these combined. So there's almost one question of each type. Total 6 questions. I would classify it as easy to medium. Overall, because it relies heavily on your awareness of the language, the rules of grammar, the usage of various words and expressions, I would say 11 to 12 attempts can be considered good enough. Okay. Let's move ahead. We'll talk about the font section. Now, this is where the real challenge started because this was the most difficult area in the test. If you had spent anything more than 25-30 minutes on this, you would have been in a position where you are not getting enough time for other areas, right? So honestly, I would suggest you to limit yourself. Okay, do not spend unnecessary time in the section because the questions are difficult. Just to give you a sample question, there was one question on there are 4 numbers. I think distinct is what it said, and all of them have 14 factors. Now, if you add these numbers to get a sum S, what is the minimum value of S? Now, this is not something that you would expect on a test like MICAT, right? So the maths has, even last year they had done it where they had just taken it to a very high difficulty level. I don't see the point of it as to why you're asking such difficult quant, because even if you reduce the difficulty a little bit, you'll still be able to shortlist people because ultimately it's percentile, right? But why make it unnecessarily difficult for everybody? Okay. So overall, I would say a great attempt is 9 to 10. If you have attempted 7 or 8, that's a good attempt. If you have attempted 5 or 6 with 100% accuracy, it is still fine. Please don't be hard on yourself because 5-6 questions were like the straightforward ones. A question on, for example, I think a 4 into 100-meter relay, the last lap that is going on, and there's a head start. So who will not win? Very, very straightforward question, right? It's just 100 meters that you have to think about. But there's something on a cubic sequence. So there were some terms given. I think first 5 or 6 terms were given, and you had to identify what exactly is the cubic sequence and then the 100th term of that cubic sequence. So if you had spent 2.5 minutes, I think you would have got it. But a lot of people would have just stayed away from the question because even if you had taken difference of differences, nothing was striking. So you had to give a thought to a lot of questions, especially questions on geometry, pentagon and find the diagonal. There's some cyclic quadrilateral or hexagon or something. Some angles are given, find the area of that. I think 2 questions on trigonometry. So that just overall made it difficult and irritating for everybody. So I'm just going to say if you attempted 7-8, I think that's very good. 9-10 with 90% accuracy is what I'm looking at. Maybe you've taken some half chances here and there. But 7-8 with 100% accuracy is fantastic. Okay, out of 20. If you have attempted anything more than that, great. I think your maths is really, really at a very good level. If you attempted anything more than 10 questions in today's paper. Okay. How many of you attempted more than 10? Did you get enough time, first of all, to do that, because overall also it was a lengthy paper. It wasn't as if you're just seeing a logical reasoning question and you're like, oh wow, this is the answer. In verbal, there were a few questions like that where it was direct vocab based. I think asuejo was one of the words that was asked today. If you know the meaning, you just finish it off in 1 second, right? But if you don't know, then you might be sitting on that question for a long time. Questions on, yeah, there was one on mixtures. I think that was also easy. I don't remember all the questions, but there were a few questions which were direct, very, very few questions. Rest, everything had like some calculation level. Quadratic was irritating, right? There was one quadratic I remember where some two inequalities are given, and then you have to find some minimum of a plus b or maximum of a plus b or something like that, right? Again, very painful question. As I can see, some of you are saying I've attempted 3, 6 on the quant. And I'm assuming that a lot of people would be there. Okay, so don't worry too much. And finally, the GK section. I really liked it because now they have gone back to their roots and have started asking more of business and brand GK. Unlike some of the previous years where they were asking very random questions from even history and geography, right? So in GK, pretty much everything focused on brand awareness or business knowledge. Question on, for example, repo rate, reverse repo rate. Question on Roger Federer and the brand endorsement, right? Question on, I think there were logos that were given, right? The Body Shop and Ubuntu logos were mentioned. Then there was something on automobile brands and their taglines. Then where the next, I think, G20 or G7 summit is going to happen, that kind of thing. So overall, GK wasn't arbitrary. Okay, and that's a good sign. At least now you know that, okay, I have to prepare business GK to be able to perform better in this particular section. Okay. So I would say 7 to 8 if you attempted. That's decent enough, assuming slightly lower accuracy here. Maybe if you're getting 4 or 5 correct, or a 3 or a 4 correct, I think that's also should be decent enough. Okay. So that's about it. Overall, I'll just take you back to that initial slide where I gave decent or good attempts. I'm just going to keep this slide so that all of you can refer to it. And then we'll be talking about some of the queries that I can see in the YouTube chat. Okay. I hope this has helped you. It has given you an overview of what happened today. And hopefully all of you will be better prepared for MICAT 2 as well. Okay. Are there any sectional cutoffs? So on the MICAT website, it is mentioned that for the individual sections, there are cutoffs. But what exactly that cutoff is, they have not mentioned it. Is it compulsory to write the descriptive section of 300 words? It said up to 300 words, if I recall correctly. So, but you have to write it, right? So the descriptive part, you have to write all the answers. In case you miss a particular question, which may happen, because it's the total score that they're looking at, if you have attempted the higher mark question, which is the creative writing, the 30 mark part, you might still be able to get a short list. Okay, but it's always better to be safe and attempt all the questions. I wrote the story of only 200 words. Rohan, I don't think that should be a problem. Let's not worry about that too much. What's a good score to get a call as per the paper? Last year, it was around 10-ish. Hardik, so what happened was last year, we had a few students who got shortlisted even with a single digit score in MICAT 1 or MICAT 2, precisely because of their high CAT score. So it's a combination that you have to look at. You cannot say that whether only this score should be sufficient or not. I would say today, a good score, right? A very, very good score is between 25 to 30. If you have got a slightly lower score compared to that, then also you have a chance, provided your CAT or ZAT score is on the higher side. Will I be disqualified if I could not visit 5 questions in psychometric? Agnidipto, we don't know exactly how they look at it. So at what point they decide that, okay, this student gets disqualified from psychometric test. So because there's so much gray area there in terms of what we know, they of course know the logic, but we don't know how they look at it. Nobody knows. So that is because I'll not be able to comment whether leaving 5 questions would lead to disqualification. What I've found in the past is very rarely people get disqualified. And if I've seen hardly 1 or 2 students that I've personally met who got disqualified because they tried to answer in a particular manner and they could not complete a majority of it. Right? But I think 5 questions, we never know. Just to be on the safe side, I'll just suggest you to take MICAT 2. Right? If you're very serious on MICA, taking MICAT 2 would be my advice. Will I make it to MICA with 80 percentile on CAT? Shreyas, so it depends on your MICAT score then. See, ultimately they look at it as a combination of MICAT score and CAT score. If at all your score in MICA is, in CAT is 80, but your MICAT score is on the higher side, right? Then it is possible for you to sort of get a shortlist. Minimum CAT cutoff, there's no minimum CAT cutoff as such. I have attempted 0 questions in quants, but overall 37. Not sure how they will look at it, man, because 0 is generally not a good strategy to do. Maybe at least a couple of questions you could have tried and should have tried. Okay, so I would suggest you to look at MICAT 2. That's the safest thing that can be done now. Okay. See, what's done is done. There's no point thinking too much about it. Just suggest you to focus on MICAT 2, and then there are any other upcoming exams that you have. So start working on that. All right, I think I've answered most of the questions. If there are any questions that I've not been able to answer, you can always put it as a comment. Now we'll stop for this particular session, but I'll ensure that I reply to your doubts if there are any. So if you have any questions, just feel free to drop a comment on the YouTube video, and also have a look at the psychometric and creative writing workshop video that is available. Okay, thanks everyone. I hope it has helped you, and wish all of you all the best for the upcoming tests.